I Feel Pretty, MA Photography, Services and Strategies, PHO703. This presentation outlines the objectives that I had in mind and the approach I took to create the final portfolio. Having researched several photographers, it became obvious that they use post-production photo editing to create the final image. They consider post-production as an integral part of making of an image surface. I'm going to discuss the photographers that influenced my journey, and more specifically how it impacts images of female models. Post-production editing can also be considered to cover not only the edits to the actual image, but how they are presented and exhibited. For example, in the photo book and how I chose to sequence and display in a local bakery, all required editing decisions. Post-production editing is what separates professional photographs from casual snapshots. Just like book writers need editing, so do images produced by a photographer. Editing can clarify and provide sharper outlines, but editing takes place throughout the whole process of making photographs, framing the scene and selecting the moment when the shutter is released, and editing decisions. Editing is a creative process. It corresponds to editing for a film. Reality isn't perfect. The camera isn't perfect either, nor might be the light, the weather, the composition. For example, a stray hair on a model, perhaps the photographer themselves, for example. A perfect shot ruined due to a wrong camera setting. All reasons for post-production editing. Before anyone says that it wouldn't be possible to clone or retouch things out on a film negative, has to know that Kodak used to sell tools, dyes, liquids and pencils specifically aimed at retouching and manipulating negatives, so it's absolutely possible for someone with the right skills. I think the difference now is that we will have much greater access to do it. The diagram shows the developing notes for an Ansel Adam image, Moonrise, and just goes to show that the person people think of as one of the ultimate film photographers did plenty of work in post-production and would often produce tens of prints before getting the look he wanted. The next few slides illustrate the nature of photo editing. This can be minor retouching or facial features, taking care not to overdo the changes which will lead to an unnatural and unbelievable resulting image. Artists like Peter Lindbergh minimize the amount of post-production, editing deliberately. He is quoted as saying, "I look at women for who they really are. Perhaps this is what leads them to trust me. These women then willingly reveal characterful faces, age, hands, bodies that might be judged imperfect." Perhaps this quote answers the question, why do women want to edit their own image? Three decades after this publication, Woolf's words still feel relevant. The definitions of beauty have changed over the last 30 years, yet our image-based culture still feeds us with the narrow idea of women, the female myth, still telling us with pictures how women should look, behave and feel. So, by using post-production software, new meaning and symbolism can be imposed into the image by the photographer, altering the perception and understanding of the viewer. In the perceived simple image of her friend entering the room, Tandberg has used digital manipulation to blend fragments of her own facial features with those of her friend, illustrating how a photographic portrait, no matter how guideless may seem, is partly the photographer's projection of themselves onto the subject. Does post-production mean the image that was taken does not reflect reality? If post-production is applied, does this take away the character of the person's portrait? Has modern society with digital filters made it an essential step in making oneself look better than reality? Does technology therefore become a blessing and a curse, faster, arguably, and more creative? Remembering that the image taken is in theory just an image of reality, can the image be considered something else apart from what was the present at the time was being taken? Artists using paints could only interpret what their eyes saw and try to reproduce it faithfully, but limited by lighting, paint choice. But in the modern day, a photograph can be deliberately altered. Specifically regarding female models, there is pressure, more so than with men, to make sure that they are portrayed as best quality of themselves with regards to looks and personality. But does the photographer have a responsibility to bring out those qualities with composition and lighting rather than rely on post-production? Here is an example of my work. I use Photoshop with every shoot. I am a firm believer that post-production editing enhances the image that I had planned for yet was unable to achieve in the camera at the time the shutter closed, for whatever reason. Here is another example of my work. Here I have used Photoshop in a non-destructive way to retouch some of the model's features without losing character or manipulating the image. Here is another example of my work. As with Peter Lindbergh's approach to his GQ magazine feature, I have included the framing of the backdrop to add to the composition. To summarise, photo editing can both enhance and detract from the original image and be manipulated to create something completely new from the original image. More questions are asked as should it be at all, but for females who want to make themselves look the best they can, it might be thought as an essential. To the photographer, it is another opportunity to have a creative outlet. And lastly, a bibliography to illustrate the research into this polarising argument, to edit or not to edit.